I'm Malavika Shivakumar, and I'm happy to welcome you here to AD Weekender and to take you for a visit of Vastrakala, our hand embroidery company that is located in Chennai. I'll come back a little bit later as to why we're in Chennai, because that's quite interesting. But let me start by saying that we are a hand embroidery company working in the field of interiors and decoration. We're about 25 years old and an Indo-French company that started off with an extraordinary journey of two young Frenchmen who fell in love with India and met two Indians who had a connection also with France. So that would be, of course, Jean-François Lesage, for those of you who know, and Patrick Savouret, who came on this first visit to India, and I met them soon after they arrived here. The source of our activity in the beginning was very much focused on embroideries for interiors, because there really is a very long-standing tradition of embroidery being a part of the decorative language and the decorative arts. And Jean-François' own background, both as an auctioneer, which is what he started out to be, as well as his interest in, of course, his family tradition of hand embroidery, led to this discovery of the embroidery traditions in India, and on one of his many trips to India, and then subsequently to this idea of creating a company that would bring the best of both France and Indian traditions. So we work with decorators and architects all over the world and propose embroideries for interiors. So today I'm going to be showing you, we're starting right off by being at what you could call the nerve center of our company, which is Jean-François' studio. And we're right here looking at where he would normally be sitting, except that he is on the other side in France when the lockdown started. We see a little bit of how he would work. Various requests would come in at the same time, quite diverse. And what we have on this table is really mixture of where he would propose specific techniques that would go with maybe specific motifs or designs and patterns. We have also prepared here, or he has prepared, I should say, you could almost call it a lexicon of embroidery, both mixing techniques as well as materials, that sometimes make it easier for him to then see what he would like to mix and match and propose for a particular design. So this is what you see right here. And from here you can have a look at what is his studio. That is the team of people that he works with really closely every day, most of whom he's worked with for more than 15 years. This is very important for him because this creates a common language. Something that is also very important to him is, you could call it sort of a memory of what we've done in this company, because that would then show, that's Patrick, our partner, one of the founding partners who unfortunately we lost 2 years ago. And from here he would have a look at the studio, call out to his teammates, and yes, I was saying that this extraordinary archiving of all that has been done permits him to have reference points from where to go. We're also looking now at a photograph, of course, of his legendary father, François Lesage, who, as many of you may know, has often been referred to as the emperor of embroidery. And it's been said that haute couture cannot be imagined without embroidery, and embroidery cannot be imagined without Lesage, which is quite an extraordinary comment. From here, I would like to then take you now to show you also a little bit of samples that have been created, collections that have been put together, which would combine, which would have themes. So you could have themes that were going from very natural and organic, raffia and bone beads and wooden beads, as you see there, and a ribbon-like work, again using raffia and beads, imitating almost a sort of lace-like effect. These are trims that have their inspiration in fashion. It's also very important for Jean-François to be able to have these reference points of what has been done and proposed. Here you would be able to see what's a collection of trims that go from something quite classical, gold, different, all handmade of course. You could also have a look at this table here, which has a little bit of what one would call a sort of kitchen, because to be able to do and work and do all this embroidery and work in the best and most efficient way, it's very important to be able to have materials at close hand and to be able to grab something and see it visually and then employ it. So there's always a lot of embroidery materials at hand. So we have 3 examples here that we're going to show you today. This was a request for the recreation of a chinoiserie door panel, an extraordinary door panel from Victor Hugo's house in Guernesey. The original panels that he himself had used to decorate were Chinese embroideries and that now needed to be replaced. So what you see as a very large door is actually then decomposed into several panels. And you can see that a little bit in this maquette that we recreated. This is also to show you that we may just get dimensions and forms, and then we actually create this maquette to imagine how this embroidery would be on that. So for example, these are photos of works in progress, and you can see here very clearly how the embroideries, which were, again, we were recreating something that was very silk, chinoiserie work, how this is when the panel is completed. You can see little details. None of the figures were then replicated. It's a very complex door with inner panels and under panels, all that all had to be numbered and needed to come together in the end without being too small or too large, because they had to fit exactly that wall. That's the first example, and the second one I have here, which is quite different, is something we did for Studio Perigali, quite an extraordinary project as well. This is what you would call they called an Indian room, and in this Indian room came from an original, authentic Machilipatnam block print. I'm thrilled about that because that is from our part of the world, the Coromandel coast, as opposed to most block prints which one tends to think come only from Western India. And we will be showing you in a short while downstairs how this was translated finally into block prints that we recreated and then we embroidered over. lastly, what we have here is a chair. So, for example, what you'd get is a request from a client for a Louis XV chair, and they would just send you a photograph of their Louis XV chair in specifically, and give you keywords. So those keywords could be, that they were looking for work that had woolen threads. They would say that they wanted something that was also, bouquets of flowers, but flowers in vases, flowers in bouquets, etc. And this is what Jean-François would then use, these keywords, to imagine what would be the composition of this entire chair. Maybe Yoga, you can just show that one chair alone would have several embroideries.
Yes, several colors. As it's a flat embroidery and they want, we have to bring in so much of depth, where you can see just in a small area we have to use 5 shades. From a highlighter to the middle color, as it goes, you can see it goes light to dark. But for, to bring in the depth where you can see like a 3D painting. So to bring in that, we need to use so many shades. So each even in the leaf you can see there are 4 shades of green. So for the embroiderers to make it easy and understandable, to begin with, we start with the painting. So he first paints the entire area, and once this is completed, we defined the line with each color, where you can see he's mentioned the paint and the thread number we are going to use. So currently what here is where we develop samples for specific clients, where what you are seeing here is for a specific French client, where we are creating the headboard, where you can see it's hand painted. So this fabric, the first layer of the fabric is set and hand painted, and we have taken the fabric and appliqued on the base fabric. So here what you see is almost a completed piece, and this is the center top of the headboard. So it's going to be a huge piece where the completed piece is for the full king size bed. And here what you see is for a Middle East client, where we are doing the master bedroom curtains. So here what you see is the threads, the gold specific. The client is very specific in the color. It can be just gold, but the gold is so different from each country. The light is so different. Here it's so different, and in their place it's so different. So they are very specific, and we get the color palette and we follow exactly the same. And this is also a very special request. The client wanted us to imitate a 17th century Italian design, and we had to create exactly the same, exactly the antique piece. And this is going to be transferred. It's going to be a footstool. So we are almost in the completion stage. Here we have also used cord, and this is also very interesting material. We call it a badla, where it gives a beautiful finish, and it shines beautifully when it's embroidered. This is the area which you can see. This is again for the same Middle East project, where we are doing ladies majlis. So they were very, they sent us a Pantone shade number, and we picked up each color. And now what we are proposing is the sheer curtain and the main curtain. Again, it's like a huge corner motif and huge bottom border. And you can see the colors were exactly picked from their rooms, and they have shared us the Pantone shade, and we have exactly picked the shades. This is again an interesting project which we are doing. It's for a chair. So what you're seeing here is the back of the chair, and this is back of the back. And here the technique is so different. We call it a twisted thread. So you can see the embroider is taking the thread and twisting it. So this, the effect, it is not so defined. So from distance it looks like a beautiful painting. Now what you're seeing is one of the finest work. We call it a bouvet stitch. It's the smallest chain stitch, which is really it's a time consuming technique, but it's a beautiful technique. What you're seeing is inspired from a hand paint, and this was a specific request from a client for the wall panels. So the entire living room is going to be covered with fillers with embroidered wallpapers. Inspired wallpaper embroidery.
So now that we've had a look at the process up close, let me show you how all of this looks scaled up in large size. Follow me, please. We're going to have a look right away at the Perigali project that we were looking at just upstairs, and you'll see here that we have a look right away at what I was talking about, which is that this is a block printed fabric which came, the original, which this paisley came from an archive that belonged to Studio Perigali, and that was the basis for where we started off. What was also fantastic is that Laura and Roberto came to visit us in Chennai to start off this project, and that's when we also realized that they were, in fact, would like us to also get these fabrics block printed and then embroidered on top. So we ended up working on with wonderful craftsmen, both the block makers as well as the block printers in this Machilipatnam coast, and that was also an extraordinary experience. So this is a panel that we did for Tiffany for one of their stores, and also a wonderful work because this is imitates the plumeria so beautifully with just what you call a beaten soft wire and a beaten rayon inside. I'm going to take you up close, which almost gives it a porcelain-like effect. Yeah, this is quite interesting because it's really is so different from what one would normally see. It's been embroidered on a wreck scene. Jean-François had done, and Patrick, in fact, in the early years, for many years, I think for more than 15 years, they didn't have a car and they rode around everywhere in tuk-tuks. And Patrick came back one day with the fabric of the tuk-tuk, and then what we wanted to embroider on top of them. And this led a little bit later a sort of Louis XIV motifs, but that are drawn like, hand-drawn sort of scribble or doodle, and then re-embroidered with silver threads. We're going to show you several parts. What was an extraordinary project for us, which was the work for the state dining room of the Rashtrapati Bhavan. So what you see here is a combination of what became the pelmet above the large windows that were facing the Mughal gardens, and the curtains that were just below this pelmet. The inspirations for these very much came from what you would call because the Mughal gardens were right there behind, were from the original works and monuments that you saw in Agra. This was just a sample of what we took with us when we made the presentation. So you see the pelmet there, and the curtains. The curtains had a sort of explosion. We wanted to combine something that would be traditional, but at the same time have a little, like a little bit of an explosion of that represented in some ways, the millions of people and the country as such. Here, a very structured border, again taking its inspiration from the Rashtrapati Bhavan building itself, and you can see this on the floors when you're walking through the building. shall we then have a look at the next part of the project? A little bit of what actually the state dining room was about. So the state dining room in the Rashtrapati Bhavan was like this, as you can see on the top. And once we finished with our work and everything was installed, this is how it looked. There were 28 of these decorative panels, which is what I'm going to be showing you right now. So the decorative panels that you see here again is just an example from the early samples that we presented. Obviously we don't have anything anymore. Everything is installed. We don't have any of the large scale. This was one example. 28 panels of decorative bouquets of flowers, none of them identical to the other. Again, on what you see as a frame, each time taking its inspiration from the building itself. The thickness of this molding, as you can see, is also very much required because these panels are so far high up on the walls that for one to be able to see them when one is seated at the table on the state dining room, they really had to be extraordinarily thick. Again, the shadows give it the required depth so that when you can see that a little bit here with the shadows. So when you're seated below, it's all very realistic, of course. We'll go on to the other panel that is also part of the same decor. Here again, of course, a lot of insistence was placed on the fact that this had to be absolutely perfect. And again, quite an extraordinary project for all our craftsmen, for whom it was very meaningful to have contributed to work that would end up in what was for them a real palace, right? The Rashtrapati Bhavan. In terms of, when we always tell them where their work ends up, and when we tell them about buildings anywhere in the world, of course they're very impressed and they listen very attentively. But of course, the Rashtrapati Bhavan right here at home, I think that strikes a different chord for them, and there was a lot of pride that they felt in knowing that what they had done here far in the confines and outskirts of South India would end up in the capital and in such a stately building. So the Opera of Monte Carlo, there was a plan to restore this opera in the early 2000s, and we were fortunate enough to receive this commission. However, the big issue was that none of the original archives were there anymore for us to work with, and we were left with just this photocopy to imagine the lambrequins, the sort of pelmets that formed the loggia, had to be completely redone. And this is all we had to work with. We had to reproduce the loggia, and we also had to work on the curtains for the scene. Of course, this wonderfully historic project of Charles Garnier. And when we recreated that, we had to propose samples. And this is, in fact, the sample that was actually rejected in a way because it was too small. It was just, the moldings were just not thick enough to be viewed when you were seated in the opera. And we had to therefore redo a sample in the right scale. You can actually see that in the final one that we did. You can see in the book that this is how the entire room is. And to be able to see this from far, when you're seated here, the thickness of the molding that was required, we had far underestimated it in our initial sample. So, Shall we speak? Yes, this is in fact when it was all finished and completed. You can see the Prince of Monaco at the inauguration. Again, a wonderful moment for us to see this work installed and people there enjoying once again the opera. Do you remember how long it took for us to do this project?
Imagine we were like really young. It was like 12 years back.
Right. I think
And
it was
30,000 hours of work.
Yes, here you see some of the people seated very close to each other because it's kind of thick. You can actually see the thickness of all of this in the loggia. Yeah, and maybe we can speak a little bit now of this other historic project. I think we had 2-3 years where we had consecutively, if I remember, in 2005, 6 and 7 extraordinary historical projects.
Exactly.
Here
Followed.
we are coming to Vaux-le-Vicomte, and Vaux-le-Vicomte is extremely well-known castle just outside Paris, and this castle, which is privately owned, the owners wanted to recreate both the bed from the king's chamber. Vaux-le-Vicomte is a castle that was built by Nicolas Fouquet, the finance minister to Louis XIV, and in fact it is said that his castle was so magnificent that Louis XIV was wondering how he was able to finance this castle. I think shortly after the great party that he had, and Louis XIV was rumored to have gone to spend one night there, I think he was shortly afterwards taken away and put into prison, sadly. So the current owners of the castle wanted us to also redo the bed posters, the bed pilasters of Madame Fouquet, the minister's wife. And in their possession was a few panels, the original panels, but a few of them were missing to be able to complete the whole bed. So what we needed to do, therefore, was to complete.
Yes. Actually, we had few archives, which was like 3/4 of the panel. So what you're seeing here was, 3/4 is the antique panel, and we had to continue the new embroidery. So the challenging part was to match the old archive sample and the colors with the new colors and the quality of the colors.
Right. I think if I remember, the completely newly done ones, we had to look at the faded colors on the old one and match that. Let's show the archive itself so we can get a measure of what this was, this fine needlework, very in woolen threads. How many threads are here? Shades
63 to 64 shades.
Right.
And even we had to embroider the background to make it antique.
Maybe we can talk now about this other historical project, which is for Jean Lanvin. Again, quite a wonderful project for us, because this was something where we went with an archive which was very different. Maybe you want just highlight a few points on what this archive was about.
Yes, actually, we had to, for this project, we had to imitate a machine embroidery. So basically what we had to imitate was exactly the strictness, the flow, even the mistakes were exactly copied.
You had to be authentic right up to those details. Yes. And I think just the files for this project were, there were several very thick files on how we had to follow right up to the last details. I think also that just to situate the context, this was for the recreation of the Musée des Arts Décoratifs, recreated some period rooms, and this was a room by Rateau. And Rateau had, this was the bedroom that he had done for Jean Lanvin. And the Musée des Arts Décoratifs recreated this room. And in fact, which later was published in the World of Interiors. I think we have a very old copy here. Sorry about that. You can get a look at some of the details of our work in the rooms once it had been installed. So moving from these very historical samples, just quickly going to pull out a few to show you a bit of a range of things that we have done. So you can go from something that is almost inspired with fashion, using beads and raffia. Here, Japanese inspired samples. Just want to show a few also of what we do, which is also very contemporary. Raffia borders, again with those shadows, very thick knotted rope, some of my favorites. And here you also have something quite a Vasarely inspired piece, very graphic, and even something at times quite joyful, to just change a little bit. This was for a wedding inspired, for a wedding, so very joyful colors, not what we normally would do. And I really like the comment made by the editor of the French World of Interiors, who said, when she saw this, said, "Oh my, it's horribly well done." I thought that was a very flattering comment from her. So join me here in what is our shop floor, where you're going to see and discover what we have going on the large frames. And you have a visual of our activity, which is in fact between both interiors as well as fashion. But I'll let you walk through to have a look at what's on frame. So I'd like to talk a little bit about why we are in Chennai. As I mentioned to you earlier, the choice was very important, but also destiny brought Jean-François and Patrick to Chennai in the early 90s. And they were really very keen on being in a center, in a city where this tradition existed. And what is not really very well known is the fact that, in fact, embroidery is so much associated with either big cities like Bombay and Calcutta and Delhi, or rural places like in UP for its chicken curry or kanta, etc. And little is known about the fact that there is in fact a very flourishing tradition of embroidery in the south. And this is actually centuries old, a tradition of hand embroidery, probably brought down by the Nawabs of the Deccan. And our craftsmen all come from this historical tradition. And what makes it very interesting for us is that none of them are really displaced. They continue to follow this tradition. In former times, they were, would be part-time agriculturists, and in the dry season, they would be turning towards embroidery. And this is the tradition from which they hail. And that is why the choice of being located here in Chennai. I hope that all of you have really enjoyed this tour and this visit. All of you at 80 and all the viewers, I wish you all a wonderful weekend. And thank you very much, 80, Greg, Komal, for giving us this opportunity to show you our atelier. So from all of us here at Vastrakala, we say bye-bye to everyone, and thank you for being here.
Bye.